Hey, it's Greg Stanley. Do you know you can now win prizes such as a Starbucks gift card, Concours tickets, or car swag for being the first to answer an entertaining trivia question? Get the weekly trivia question by following me on Instagram or Facebook at the Collector Car Podcast and just DM me your answer. The first person with the correct answer wins. Also, as a new aspect of my automotive passion and hobby, I am a car specialist consultant for RM Sotheby's. If you need assistance consigning a collector car at Amelia Island, Pebble Beach, Auburn, West Palm, or Hershey, email me directly at gstanley@rmsotheby's.com.
This is the Collector Car Podcast, the home for the auto enthusiast. Join Greg Stanley as he applies over 25 years of insights and analytical experience to the collector car market. He will interview the experts and throw in some fun stuff as well.
Welcome to the Collector Car Podcast. Got a great guest today, Steve Volk. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing great.
If you would, I know you're heavily involved in the automotive world, specifically the Shelby world. If you would, tell me a little bit about your museum, how it got started, and some of the cool cars in it.
Well, the Shelby American Collection in Boulder, Colorado it has grown into the finest collection of Shelby race cars in the world. We actually started it back in 1996. We had a relationship with Carroll Shelby. Carroll Shelby was a good friend, and we started collecting Cobras and GT40s and memorabilia back in the 80s, and we were vintage racing Cobras. Actually, one of the founders, Bill Murray, who has Murray Racing in Loveland, Colorado, he was actually racing. He was racing a Cobra in SCCA. He was actually the last, probably, semi-professional Cobra that was being raced up until like 1983. Anyway, so one day, we had so much memorabilia, a lot of cars, and one day we sat down with Carol and said, you have done so much for American auto racing and also in terms of putting America on the map, with not only the SCCA championships and USRRC championships, but the FIA championships. I mean, he took us to Europe, and he took America to Europe and won the World Manufacturers Championship in 1965. So we sat down with Carol and we said, you've done so much for America and the American car industry as a whole, ushering in the muscle car era with the Shelby Mustang. Nobody has done a museum that is entirely focused on your accomplishments, and we want to do that here in Boulder, Colorado.
That just spawned because of Boulder's where the collection began?
That's right.
Okay. And then what was the price point these cars were trading at back in the early 80s when it began? Was it, $50,000 car versus the $2 or $3 million car now?
Yes. In fact, I bought a Cobra team car in the early 80s and, paid like $120,000 for it. And everybody thought I was absolutely insane to pay that kind of money for a factory, which obviously today is a multi-million-dollar car. But when we asked Carroll that question, he paused. We were in his office out in Gardenia, and he turned, he looked at me, and he said, Steve, I would be honored if you would, create a museum in my name, and I will support you for as long as I'm vertical. And he kept his word.
Wow, that's really cool. Now, what was the very first car in the collection that is still in the collection?
We have the FIA Cobra Roadster CSX 2345, and that's been in the collection for like 22 years. That car was driven by Phil Hill and Bob Bondurant and Sir John Whitmore, Roy Salvadori, Jack Sears. Everybody drove it, and it ran in the championship season, racked up a ton of points in 65. It's got 5 first place FIA wins. So yeah, the car, and won Pebble Beach in 2012. A lot of the original cars are still there. Sometimes they've been traded to get something better. The museum owns some of the cars because some of the cars have been donated, but others are owned by collectors around the country. Myself, Tom Benjamin, has a series of Cobras in the collection. And then Larry Miller of the Larry H. Miller family was a good friend and an avid collector. And, he passed away, of course, but his family is continuing to support our museum. So we have a number of their cars on display in the collection.
Yeah. Now, could you tell me one of the stories of, you hear about a Cobra and kind of the length or the adventure you went on to get one of those awesome cars?
Yeah. When we started collecting the cars in the early 80s and into the 90s, you just had to hunt them down. And there was a lot of confusion, too, about, in the early days about what car was what. For instance, we have the Ken Miles GT40 P1015, the Mark II that he won Le Mans in 1966. But we also have 1016, which is the gold Mark GT40 Mark II that was the third place winner that Ronnie Bucknam drove. For years, back in the 70s, those cars were reversed. People thought until Ronnie Spain sorted things out. So, that there's been cases like that, but I don't think that there's been a lot of new discoveries here, really significant Cobra or GT40 discoveries maybe in the last 10 years.
Now, have you ever had a barn find Cobra?
We have had some of those on. We had a 427 on display that Bill Murray of Murray Racing restored. That was a barn find, and it was full of rodent scat, and the steering wheel was, chewed up by some kind of animal.
Wow. So what was the story on that one? Like, how to get in the barn? How long was it there? Who found it? That kind of stuff.
Bill Murray was involved in finding it, and it was a fairly substantial, body off restoration that lived in the museum for a while, and then has now moved on.
Now, this is called the Collector Car Podcast. So what cars are in your personal collection, if you can share?
I'm fortunate enough to own that FIA Cobra Roadster CSX 2345, and that's totally unrestored. That's just as it raced, down to its tires. And then I've got one of the Cobra Le Mans cars, the black with the short trunk. That's CSX 2137, and that's a really important car because it's the first Cobra to win an FIA race with Dan Gurney, and it was also driven by Bob Bondurant. The other Cobra that I own that's really significant is one of the black Cobra Le Mans from '63, and that's the first Cobra to win an FIA race, the Times Grand Prix out in LA, and that was, it was Bridgehampton. That was the first FIA win with Dan Gurney. And that's the first Cobra that started the Cobra Ferrari wars, and that's the first Cobra to win an FIA race, American car with an American driver, Dan Gurney, to win an FIA race. And then Bob Bondurant drove it in the 63 Times Grand Prix in LA. So, that's a really important car. That's in the museum. And I'm fortunate enough to own one of the full comp 427s. We made about 23 of these, CSX 3029, and that's a recent restoration by Murray Racing.
So which one of those cars was first to your collection, and what was the story behind it? How did you find it?
I had one of the early cars was the 2345, the FIA Roadster. There's only 2 surviving. They made 5 FIA Cobra Roadsters, and 3 of them were kind of destroyed in Europe and pieced back together. But the other Cobra Roadster, that FIA Cobra Roadster that survives, is CSX 2323. I owned that for a while, and then I had an opportunity to obtain CSX 2345. It was owned by Michael Schoen of the U-Haul family, and he's a Cobra historian. He wrote the Cobra Ferrari Wars, and I was able to acquire that from him. And then the other significant car that I own is the Mario Andretti 1967 Mark IV that he drove at Le Mans with Lucien Bianchi in at the '67 Le Mans. He set a track record, and he was running in second place when they came in for brakes, went out, and then he spun and clipped the front nose, so he was out of the race.
Now, if you had to, this is a cruel question, but if you had to pick one of those to stay in your garage and you had to sell the other ones, which one would you keep?
Well, I think the FIA Cobra Roadster, and the reason why I say that is with the 5 first-place FIA wins, and more importantly, it's the only factory team car that is completely unrestored, down to the tires. It won Pebble Beach in 2012. That's the keeper.
Right. Now tell us a little bit more about your other cars that you have in the collection there at the museum. I'm assuming some are kind of on display for a little while. You have different types of events that come through there. Is that correct? Or different kinds of collections that come through there?
We've actually been pretty stable, for the last 20 years or so, and just been adding cars. But the highlights of the collection, we have the very first Cobra that the Larry H. Miller family bought. Carroll owned it up until his death in 2012, and then the family put it up for auction in the Larry H. Miller family. The Shelby family put it up for auction, and the Larry H. Miller family purchased it. So that's CSX 2000. So that's the very first Cobra, and that's in the museum. We have one of the Cobra Daytona Coupes, and that's CSX 2299, and that's, in our opinion, the most significant of the 6 coupes because it won Daytona and Sebring and Le Mans.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more about that? Is that the red one? That's the right-hand drive?
No, you're thinking of the Wilmot Coupe. We also have that, and that has a very significant race history, actually. As you probably know, John Wilmot, called up Shelby in '64 and said, hey, I'd like to get a coupe. And Carroll said, I don't have one to give, but I'll send a couple guys over and help you guys fabricate one. And so that became known as the Wilmot Coupe. And yes, it is red. It's had in its racing history, it's had a few different configurations. And, driven by guys like Jack Sears, it's a very significant car. It has a fabulous race history. And Greg, I should mention, when we started the museum back in 1996, we would have these annual events, and everybody would come out. If you came to one of our galas, you would see, of course, Dan Gurney and Carroll Shelby and Bob Bondurant and Jack Sears and Phil Remington and Bob Johnson and Tom Payne. They all came, and it was so amazing to spend the weekend with those guys in Boulder, Colorado, and to get to know those guys. And did I mention Phil Hill?
Yeah. No, I don't think he did, but that's an amazing collection of folks that have had a lot of history with the Shelby nameplate. That's amazing to get them all in your museum for those type of events.
We did, and we did it year after year after year. And, Pete Brock would come, all the guys would come, and Chuck Cantwell, Lou Spencer, and they were all so appreciative of the effort, because we're an all-volunteer organization. They're so appreciative of the effort that we had put into the museum. And they were actually, in the 90s and even into the 2000s. And, Alan Grant, too, is in that group. I'm sure I've left some folks out. And Alan Grant still comes along with Aaron Shelby. And they were so appreciative and so surprised that, anybody cared about what they did back in the 60s, and it was so amazing to see them together and hear the arguments that came out. Alan Grant talking about how Bob Bondurant bumped him, and Carroll Shelby and Phil Hill, a couple times got into it. But Shelby won Le Mans as a driver in 1959 in an Aston Martin DBR1. And, because Phil was winning almost every year back then, and hearing the arguments about, we had this problem and that problem. Otherwise, there's no way in hell you would have won, Shelby.
Wow, that's really amazing. And could you talk a little bit about your Daytona Coupe? Like you said, there's only one of 6 ever made. I know I've seen the one at the Simeon Museum.
We have had that for I would say, about 18 years, and that was purchased. The guy who owned it, I won't mention names here, he had spent $1 million on it.
Wow.
It cost him $1 million bucks, and he just couldn't believe that he had $1 million tied up in a car. And so we were able to buy it. We had to buy it of the Larry H. Miller family. Larry bought it, and at a multiple of that, but it wasn't anything like what it's worth today.
Right.
We were very fortunate to get it, and we've had a lot of fun with it. We vintage raced it, took it to Europe, ran it at Goodwood, and it's a fantastic car. And it just got back. It was at the Museum of Modern Art in Phoenix, Arizona, for a display they were doing.
All right, well, I have to ask, what's one car that's on your museum's wish list?
I would say that would have to be, 1046, the P1046, which is the black number 2 GT40 Mark II that won Le Mans in '66. We have the second place. We have the Ken Miles car, and we have the third place car.
Yeah, so get all three of them lined up in your museum would be pretty nice, wouldn't it?
Yes, and I mentioned the Andretti Mark IV, which is J7. There were two early J cars, J1 and J2, and Ken Miles, of course, was killed in J2, and we have the remains of J2 on at the museum. But and then they went back and destructively tested and destroyed J1. So there's really only, of the original cars that were raced, there's only 6 Mark IVs. And we are fortunate to have 2 of those in our museum in Boulder. We have J4, which is the yellow Sebring car that Bruce McLaren and Mario Andretti won Sebring. And then we have the J7 that Mario Andretti drove at Le Mans.
That's amazing. Now, I know you have some interest in some of the Shelby street cars, including, one of the Paxton supercharged test cars, is that right?
We have a really interesting car that was donated to the museum by Steve and Joyce Yates, and that is a 1966 Shelby Mustang GT350 S. It's the only one. It's the only S that Shelby made. It's ivy green. It's the first Shelby that wasn't painted white, and it's the factory prototype Paxton supercharged car.
Yeah, I've read about that one for years, and isn't it the only one that actually says GT350S on the rocker stripes from the factory?
That's correct.
Wow. Now, I know one car that's coming up for sale at one of the auction houses soon is the 66 GT350 Ivy Green convertible. Do you guys have any interest in one of those 4 convertibles out there?
Maybe. We haven't really talked much about that internally, but that would be a really interesting car to have, too.
Right. I know the red one sold recently, and I think the yellow one's in Pensacola. It's hard to keep track of these cars after so many years.
I agree.
What? Yeah. Okay. Well, cool. Well, what car has gotten away? What is one car that you either owned in the previous life that you wish you still had, or that you almost got in a museum but it just never worked out?
Well, I would say that would be Fred Simeon's Daytona Coupe. We were a bidder on that CSX 2287. We thought we had secured the car, and but it wound up at a great museum. Fred Simeon, the Simeon Museum, he's done a fabulous job, and he's got a fabulous collection of cars.
Right, yeah, that's a great one to unfortunately having had missed out on.
We've been focusing, for the last 25 years on memorabilia, and when I say memorabilia, I'm talking about original race records. And Carroll was kind enough to, he donated a lot of his memorabilia in terms of race records from Le Mans, 66 Le Mans, 67 Le Mans, and Daytona and Sebring. And then we've also been collecting trophies from in-period trophies, molds. We have the original molds on the on the Ford GT Mark IV. There's only one original set in existence, and it's in our museum.
Wow.
And we have a lot of the GT40 parts, in terms of the experimental automatic transmissions. There's a lot to see in our museum.
Wow. Okay. No, that's really great. Well, now, what are some trends you're seeing in the collector car marketplace? I've noticed it seems like the small block AC Cobras have gotten a little bit soft in the last few months. Have you seen any overarching trends around Shelbys?
Yeah, there have been some 289 streetcar sales that have been surprising, but I think that the cars with history are still going to remain really strong. I know that one of my a car I used to own, and that's R002, the first R model.
Really? Wow.
It is coming up for sale. It's supposed to be at Mecum Indy. I think that car is going to do really well. That was driven by Ken Miles and Jerry Titus, and that is, I know it's got the wrong number on it. The Shelby, it's really R001, right?
Right.
I mean, it's the first one made, but the chassis plate on it is 002, only because, it didn't matter back then. The guys put the wrong plate on when they were done racing it. I think you probably know the story. I think that car will do very well at auction. Recently we saw the Bullet Mustang did very well at auction. So I think for cars with good history and cars that can be documented, no story cars will continue to be strong even while we go through this phase with COVID-19.
Right. Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I guess I should clarify. The ones that have sold recently were not that type of cars. I think the buyers are very selective, and the cars that have sold, some of them were, they were used on rallies. They weren't a fresh restoration, a little bit more on the tired side. So I do totally agree with you on that statement. Now, do you have any Cobra Rs or GT350 Rs in the collection?
Yes, we do.
Wow.
We're pretty we're highly focused, but we've got within the Shelby world, having the first Cobra, we've got all variations of GT40s. We have 108, the Roadster. So we have GT40 Roadster. We have the two oldest surviving GT40s, which is GT103 and GT104. Those are lightweight chassis. And those are the first. Not only are they the oldest surviving GT40s, but they're the first GT40s to win a race at
Wow.
Daytona in '65. So we can go. We can go from 103, 104 to our Roadster, which is GT108, and then we've got some other Mark I race cars. We have Mark IIs. We have a Mark III road car. And then we have two of the Mark IVs, as I mentioned, and then we have one of the Gulf team cars, which is P1074. Now recall that P1075 is the twice Le Mans winner. And so this is a sister car, and it didn't finish at Le Mans, but it's got some nice wins at Reims and Spa.
Right. Okay. Now, I do have one last question about a car that may or may not be in your collection. I didn't see it on your website, but do you have one of the 1666 SCCA Group 2 Mustang Coupe Racers?
Oh, no, we do not. You're talking about like a notchback Trans Am car?
Right, which is my understanding. Those are basically R models under the skin, but they're technically Ford Mustangs because they didn't change the VIN.
Yeah, and we currently don't have one of those.
Okay, so all right. So I picked something that's not actually in your museum, which has been really, really hard to do because you're so well stocked with Shelby cars. That's awesome. Okay. All right. Well, cool. Well, are there any promotions or events coming up with your museum that you'd like to share? I know it's tough right now with COVID going on.
Yeah, every year we do a giveaway for a new Shelby Mustang. Ford is one of our sponsors, and they give us allocation. We still have to buy the car. But this year's car is amazing. It's a 2020 Shelby Mustang GT500, and it's in Ford Performance Blue. It's got all the options, and so folks can enter that if you're interested in winning a GT500. We'll do the drawing September 5th.
Wow, and that's an amazing car. I just see that on your website. That is one that I'm going to have to submit my ticket for sure. Well, that's really, really cool. Well, I do like to play one game here at the end. I think I gave you a heads up. It's called Keep, Cash, and Crush. So what I do is I pick out 3 cars from you. I will not pick any from your collection because I'm not that mean of a guy. But I pick out 3 cars for you, and you have to pick out which one you want to keep forever, which one you want to cash in for cash, and then which one you're okay crushing, which is the hard part of this little game. So are you ready to play?
I'm ready.
All right. I've got 3 cars for you here. The first one is a 63 289 Cobra barn find, so in really, really rough shape. The next one is a 66, one we talked about earlier, a 66 Shelby convertible, one of 4. And the third one is, I believe, the only 67 GT500 convertible ever made. I believe they made 1 in 67, and then they had the 4 in 66. Does that sound correct for 67?
I think so.
Okay, so those are your 3 cars, a 67 GT500 convertible, one of 1, a 66 Shelby GT350 convertible, one of 4, and a barn find 63 289 Cobra. Which one would you keep, which one would you cash in, and which one would you crush?
Okay, I would keep the 63 289 Cobra. For certain.
Really? Okay.
And I would cash in the 67 and crush the 66 convertible.
Wow. You did not pick those in the order I thought you were going to pick them in. Okay. Explain your reasoning to me.
Well, assuming that the barn find is not too rough, I would like to leave that car original. I think that, not necessarily barn finds, but I think original cars are years from now, and you're seeing it now on a trend. A original survivor is super important, and it'll be really important years from now. And I'm assuming that 67 it was GT500 prototype is going to bring maybe more cash than one of the 66 convertibles.
Okay, that's sound reasoning. I like it. I was surprised because I thought, well, maybe the barn find, he'll crush the barn find, but no, that's the first one you took, so that's really cool. Well, what's the best way for our listeners to learn more about your museum and your giveaway?
You can go to our website, which is shelbyamericancollection.org. You'll want to visit our Facebook page because we're constantly, we're very active on Facebook and posting a lot of historical images, and also we do videos in the museum even now. And we'll post those little mini tours. We'll feature a car or 2, so that'll be of interest. And then on the GT500 giveaway, you just go to Shelby GT500 contest.org.
All right. Well, thanks, Steve, for sharing your passion for collector cars, specifically Shelbys, with us today.
Oh, you're very welcome, Greg. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Collector Car Podcast. Don't forget to give us a nice rating on iTunes and be sure to follow us on Instagram and everywhere else at the Collector Car Podcast.